I want to start with what it is that Republican senators, led by Senator Mike Rounds, are talking about regarding Donald Trump, Vladimir Putin, and this deal. Again, we're back on Russian-Ukraine deals.
We're doing this on a bipartisan basis. We were there when Secretary Rubio made the phone call, and the number one, I did ask, can we say that we've received the phone call from you? And he says yes. And can we explain basically what had occurred? And he said yes. And so what we can share with you is the federal government, or this administration was not responsible for the release of this information in its current form. But we can also tell you that at this point, they want to be able to utilize it as a starting point for where Russia is making demands.
Mike Rounds, they're talking about Russia making demands with this point plan, things that they want to get to end the conflict that, of course, Vladimir Putin and the Russians started. I mean, that's the starting point that many folks in this MAGA administration refuse to acknowledge, and that's probably one of the reasons why we have such a confusing situation. Let's see if ABC News can clear up to us what's confusing, what's been happening, why Mike Rounds is trying to discuss in this roundabout way this whole plan that is a Russian demand list.
This could be a very pivotal moment for Ukraine, with the Trump administration ramping up pressure on the war-torn country to accept its latest peace plan. And they're giving Kyiv a stark ultimatum: take the new deal by Thanksgiving or risk losing U.S. support. This morning, high-stakes meetings between U.S. and Ukrainian officials set to begin in Switzerland. As Russia continues its relentless, deadly attacks, a Ukrainian official tells ABC News the Trump administration is threatening to cut off all military aid if the war-torn country does not agree to the administration's proposed peace deal. But President Trump now says his 28-point peace plan is not his final offer.
We're trying to get it ended. One way or the other, we have to get it ended.
Then overnight, a group of senators say Secretary of State Marco Rubio told them that the plan is a Russian proposal, directly contradicting what the president has claimed.
It is not our recommendation. It is not our peace plan. It is a proposal that was received and as an intermediary.
But soon after, Rubio publicly denying the comment, saying the peace proposal was authored by the U.S. It is offered as a strong framework for ongoing negotiations. It is based on input from the Russian side, but it is also based on previous and ongoing input from Ukraine. But that plan, alarming our allies across Europe. It forces Kyiv to give up more territory in the east, giving Russia control of almost 1/5 of the entire country. The deal would also limit the size of Ukraine's military to 600,000 and force Ukraine to promise it will never join NATO. But the plan does provide some sort of U.S. military-backed security guarantee for the country. President Zelensky says Ukraine may be choosing between losing its dignity or losing a key partner. Even Republican Senator Mitch McConnell is criticizing the deal, saying, quote, Putin has spent the entire year trying to play President Trump for a fool. Rewarding Russian butchery would be disastrous to America's interests.
First of all, let's address the obvious. Does anyone really think that Donald Trump came with a 28-point peace plan between Russia and Ukraine? Does anyone really think that, especially since, as we saw, some of those points of those 28 include many things that Vladimir Putin wants? In fact, that demand list that Mike Rounds was talking about, and some of those demands, including the things that Donald Trump talked about on the campaign trail that were troubling to people who were paying attention to him talking about the way to appease someone who's invading countries, to give them what they want and then hope that they'll stop doing what it is that they said they're going to keep doing. And so when that's happening here, as far as these details of limiting the size of the Ukraine army, never joining NATO, and also giving up that territory, as he consistently talked about, does anyone really believe that this has anything to do with Donald Trump coming up with some plan out of nowhere when he's been dealing with, let's not forget, all of the corruption and scandals that are surrounding his administration? Let me give Angus King, independent, but a Democratic-leaning guy, some more chance to talk about it at this press conference.
This has been an extraordinary weekend, both because of the sessions that we've had with people from all over the world, but also because of the communication, as was mentioned today, from Secretary Rubio and the leaked 28-point plan which, according to Secretary Rubio, is not the administration's position. It is essentially the wish list of the Russians that is now being presented to the Europeans and to the Ukrainians. It does provide a guideline to try to narrow the issues between Ukraine and Russia. And the encouraging thing to me is that the administration is not attempting to negotiate this agreement unilaterally, but indeed is in close consultation in the next few days with Ukraine and with our European allies. So I think that's an important development. All of us read that statement yesterday. We're alarmed by it, I think. That's a fair statement. It turns out that it is a sort of a beginning point for negotiations.
It was startling to look at all of these details and think, is this the plan? Is this what they want? Is this what they're presenting to us? I mean, it can't possibly be. Again, like I said, they're startled by it because it didn't make much sense, and it gave them the freedom, again, back to Mike Rounds, Republican in this case, to talk about what is that Rubio told them and giving them permission to even talk about it beforehand. Marco Rubio got his signals crossed, and we're trying to figure out where and then why he's not explaining it.
Secretary Rubio did make a phone call to us this afternoon. I think he made it very clear to us that we are the recipients of a proposal that was delivered to one of our representatives. It is not our recommendation. It is not our peace plan. It is a proposal that was received, and as an intermediary, we have made arrangements to share it, and we did not release it. It was leaked. It was not released by our members or our representatives.
I'm pretty much past whether or not it was leaked or not. The whole point, maybe they're concerned about whether or not it was leaked and who it was leaked by, because this is bad, bro. This looks really bad. It makes them have to then scramble, specifically them being Marco Rubio in this situation, scramble and try and tell us what he told them isn't what they're saying. So in order for that to make any sense, Marco Rubio is telling everyone all these guys would have to be lying. Mike Rounds, Angus King, because Marco Rubio, who works for the most corrupt and dishonest administration probably in history, is talking, and he just takes things back and says they're lying. Does that make any sense?
So it is in my personal view that we've had probably the most productive and meaningful meeting so far in this entire process since we've been involved from the beginning. We have a very good work product that was already built on a foundation of input from all the relative parties involved here, and we were able to go through some of those items now point by point, and I think we've made good progress. Our teams have now gone to their rooms as we're working on some of the suggestions that were proffered to us. So we're working through making some changes, some adjustments, in the hopes of furthering narrowing the differences and getting closer to something that both Ukraine and obviously the United States are very comfortable with. Obviously, this will ultimately have to be signed off by our presidents, although I feel very comfortable about that happening, given the progress we've made. And then obviously there's the Russian side of the equation. But again, we think we have some pretty substantial insights over the last 9 months into some of the things that are really important to them. So I think the takeaway from it is, I think this is a very, very meaningful, I would say probably best meeting and day we've had so far in this entire process, going back to when we first came into office in January.
So if everything has been so smooth sailing, as I guess now Marco Rubio is trying to say it has been, I'm wondering why the increasingly irritable president of the United States, who has some new stylings going on here, why he's still so brash and angry.
Is this your final offer to Ukraine?
No, not my No, we'd like to get the peace. It should have happened a long time ago. The Ukraine war with Russia should have never happened. If I were president, it never would have happened. We're trying to get it ended. One way or the other, we have to get it ended. So then he can continue. Then he can continue to fight his little heart out.
Does that sound like a guy who gives a damn about peace? Does that sound like a guy who's actually trying to be in the middle of this whole thing and broker a peace deal? Does that sound like a guy who who's going to talk to the person in the country who is the aggressor in this entire conflict, that he has to start every time by saying, if I was in office, this never would have happened. Nobody cares anymore about that line. Bro, we know that's your standard line every time you talk about Russia, Ukraine. If I was in office, that wouldn't have happened. But now you're in office and things got worse. Now you're in office and we're seeing that you're blatantly and explicitly working for the guy that you said you had such a great relationship with. I feel like when you say you have a great relationship with some people who are or objectively really bad guys who invade countries and say, here, give me some land because I invaded, who, by the way, that stance was piggybacked by you and your Secretary of War. I feel like you guys are all on the same page. So the whole thing about fighting his little heart out, being Zelensky in Ukraine, that means he doesn't really give a damn. That means what he's more interested in is carrying water for Vladimir Putin. So Tommy Pigott, who's the State Department's principal deputy spokesperson, was responding to that whole thing when someone was reporting about Angus King talking about this plan being put forward and it's a wish list for Russians. He responded on Twitter and said, this is blatantly false. As Secretary Rubio and the entire administration has consistently maintained this plan was authored by the United States with input from both the Russians and the Ukrainians. I'd like to refer you back, and maybe I need like a standard, like a reference back to what we should all think every time this administration says anything that's questionable, which is like 99%. They're liars. So why should we listen to the principal deputy spokesperson for the State Department say that Rubio and the whole administration has consistently maintained that this is authored by the United States when it's pretty obvious that they lie about everything? That is, especially when smart people look into what it is that this looked like and discovered something else that flies in the face of that latest lie. It's from the New Republic. The U.S. peace plan presented to Ukraine appears to have been translated from Russian. The syntax of certain phrases are more common in the Russian language, such as the third point of the 28-point plan. Here's a quote. It is expected that Russia will not invade neighboring countries and NATO will not expand further. Here's more details about this translation, rough translation. It is expected is not commonly used in English, but it is common in Russian and appears to come from the phrase, which I'm not going to understand or even mention, according to The Guardian's Luke Harding. Other words that appear to be translated from Russian include ambiguities and to enshrine. More Russian words there pointed out in this New Republic article. So last little bit on this translation that I've seen from multiple sources, not just New Republic, but I feel like theirs broke it down pretty well. It is no accident either. The plan was hammered out by President Trump's envoy, Steve Witkoff, and Kirill Dmitriev, an advisor to Russian President Vladimir Putin, after the two met last month in Miami. While Secretary of State Marco Rubio was also involved, no Ukrainian or European officials were, which is pretty evident by its contents. Pause for a second here. Marco Rubio just said that this is all put together by input between Russian sides and also Ukrainian sides. I wonder if someone asked him, you were there, Marco, and so was Steve Witkoff and also the President Vladimir Putin's advisor. But there was no Ukrainian or European officials there at all. How was it possible that they had their input if they weren't even there for this whole thing that you said you were involved in and that you later took back was all written and given to you by some other person? So here's a couple Republicans that are responding to it. Here's Don Bacon responding to Tommy Pigott talking about how blatantly false this whole thing is. He says some people better get fired on Monday. That's today. For the gross buffoonery we just witnessed over the last 4 days. This hurt our country and undermined our alliances and encouraged our adversaries. That's Don Bacon. Senators confirmed that the Trump administration's 28-point peace plan for Ukraine wasn't a U.S. plan at all. Of course it was, right? So per PBS's Nick Schifrin, it was delivered to Trump, to his envoy, Steve Witkoff, by someone representing Russia. Trump and the administration pushed it. They pressured Zelensky to accept the terms, and then the allies also condemned it. Hand-delivered, just given to Steve Witkoff? Why would Steve Witkoff, who was the envoy, special envoy to meet with Vladimir Putin's people to end this whole thing months ago? Why was it that Steve Witkoff would just accept something from some Russian representative and then pass it off and translate it roughly into English and say that it was our plan? That is while Marco Rubio told fellow Republicans in the Senate that, it is a Russian plan. But that is before he switched back and said that it's his. Here's Steve Witkoff answering my question as to why he'd be a lemming.
What did you think of him? I liked him. Yep. I thought he was straight up with me. Of course, by the way, I've said that. And
Yeah.
you can imagine, by the way, I say that, I get pilloried. Oh my gosh, you're actually
word
saying
called communication, which many people would say, I shouldn't have had because Putin is a bad guy. I don't regard Putin as a bad guy. That is a complicated situation, that war, and all the ingredients that
Yes,
led up to it.
amen.
And it's never just one person, right? So
That's why. Because Steve Witkoff will defend Vladimir Putin and say he's a great guy.